Hello everyone and welcome to today's panel talk for World Environment Day, which is a subject which is close to my heart. So I thought it was important to be able to get artists on today that relate to the ideas of sustainability and environment. We have the fantastic artists Diane Watson, Tessa Coe, Louise Beer and Caroline Hyde-Brown today to talk to you about their practice with a 20-minute panel discussion at the end. If you want to ask them any questions or mention any comments, please do type in the chat feature, or if you want to do it anonymously, please use the Q&A feature and I'll be here to read them and pass on any comments or questions. And so I will hand it over to our first artist, Diane Watson.
Hi, thank you. I'm Diane Watson. I'm an environmental artist. About 6 years ago, I got a dog called Bobby, which is the black dog in the picture on my right, which meant I spent a lot more time on my local beach. I'm based in the northeast of England and live right on the coast. And I was alarmed just how much plastic, as you can see in the other picture, that was finding on the beach. Mostly it was plastic bottles. So I just started picking them up off the beach, putting them in the bin when I came off the beach. But as kind of time went on, I kind of became a little bit obsessed with the things that I found because I was finding so many kind of bizarre and interesting things. So I started to collect the things that I find and recording those objects in just by taking photographs of them. And it was like, and the date of some of the things I was finding, so that Duckham's Hyde-Brown, I'm not even sure what it's called, transmission oil is probably from the 1970s. The Smarty lids, you don't really get anymore. They have not been making them for about 10 years. And so yeah, and stuff from all over the place. So that kind of tin, I think it's of active dried yeast, has come from France. So I just became quite interested in the things that I found rather. And before long, as you can see from this image, I had amassed quite a collection of stuff. Now, I'm only out on the beach every day with my dog for about, I don't know, a couple of miles. I walk a mile there, a mile back. So it's a big collection from not a lot of beach, really. So I started thinking, well, how can I use these things? So I just started segregating them into coloured objects, thinking, because my background's in textiles, kind of wondering what I could do with them. And instinctively kind of started creating patterns and designs from the objects, really just initially for my own, I don't want to say entertainment, but it was for my own entertainment. So I quickly started making these prints. Again, just because I've got a textiles background, so I was using those objects and photographing them and creating kind of textile designs by repeating the patterns, sort of, you know, mirror imaging them. To create this kind of kaleidoscopic effect of strange plastic objects. So I then had an exhibition in Gateshead, and this was kind of the first exhibition I had of the plastic objects. And people were really interested, and I kind of, you know, it was kind of a way of getting that message across about the damage that we're causing the environment in a kind of decorative way, which was an unusual approach, I think, at the time. So you see the image on my right is of a wallpaper that I did. That pattern is all made out of different plastic objects. And I think, like, yeah, what was interesting, people were going, oh yeah, that's a nice pattern. But once they got close up and they realized what it was made out of, it was like kind of a penny drop moment for people, like, you found all that on the beach. And then I started doing more research into just how much plastic there is in the sea. Like I say, this was just from my kind of little 1 or 2 mile stretch of beach on the northeast coast. And I found out that was 8 million pieces of plastic enter the sea every day. I mean, obviously that's an estimate. And 10 million tons of plastic are entering the sea from different sources every year. So this kind of piece was a response to me sort of doing a little bit more research into this sort of impact of plastics on the ocean. So this was a 10-meter length of wallpaper that I kind of measured out the first sort of section of it. So it was actually also represented 1 ton of plastic. So I weighed out 5 kilos of plastic and repeated that kind of 5 kilo image over and over again to create the piece. And then, so then when I was having that conversation with people at the exhibition, it was like, that's just 1 million. Imagine 10, you know, imagine 10 million pieces of that wallpaper, how much space that was filling, and people were again like responding to that because I was kind of visualizing the problem. It's just another shot from the exhibition. So alongside that piece, this was a collection of some of the things I'd found in possibly, that's kind of nothing compared to what I've got now. It was about a year it took me to sort of collect that much stuff. Maybe a bit less. Like I say, I'm only out walking the dog. I'm not out on a sort of 24/7 mission to collect plastic. So yeah, there's a lot of plastic in the sea, and obviously that's causing a great deal of environmental damage. They reckon 1 million seabirds every year are dying from either being entangled in plastic or consuming plastic, and then obviously the stomach's full of plastic and they can't eat. And also that 1 in 3 fish that we caught for human consumption now also contain plastic. So yeah, it's having a massive impact on the environment, what we eat, and the wildlife. So after those kind of 2 exhibitions, I was kind of thought of another way of representing what I did. So I got Arts Council funding, and for a year I recorded everything that I'd collected. Now I've also binned quite a lot of stuff. Some stuff I can't use, like plastic bottles and crisp packets, sweet wrappers, and all the other kind of bits of plastic that you might find on the beach. So this was kind of a record of all the hard kind of plastic that I kept. So I recorded everything. Like I say, I recorded everything I found for a year. So each one of those wallpapers in the background on that image represent a month of the year. So I kind of did it by month. So there was 12 prints. And in the course of a year, I collected over 7,000 pieces of plastic from about 4 miles of different beaches, you know, within like my local area. Which gave me a really good idea of what was the top sort of offenders, what were the things I was finding the most of, etc. So, which, you know, kind of led on to other work. So as you can see, there's also display cases there in the front. So plastic bottle lids are by far the biggest offender. Out of those 7,000 pieces that I found, over 1,000 were plastic bottle lids. The bottles are often made out of a softer plastic than the lids, so when they're in the sea, they just disintegrate a lot quicker. So you get more lids than you do bottles. And they're completely, you know, useless once somebody's used them once. That is their, you know, the end of their use, the end of their lifespan. Every day I go to the beach, I'll find people have left the plastic bottles behind after they've had picnics. So yeah, they're the things I hate the most. So yeah, this is just, I think that was February's wallpaper that you can see in that image. And I did 6 different boxes in this exhibition. And this was the box of objects that I weren't sure what they were. There was one of toys, one of stuff that had come down the toilet, one of bottle lids, industrial things. So, you know, it's a wide variety of different things that I find a lot of. But yeah, this was the box of things I wasn't sure what they were. And yeah, it's just another shot from the exhibition. And let's say, so I did Hartlepool Headland Beach. I did 42 beach cleans, which means I walked that beach 42 times that year. It was about 2.3 mile walk. So that's the end of pier and back. And I collected 2,904 pieces. So again, it was kind of quite a scientific approach to what I was doing, so I could quantify what I was finding. And this kind of information was the kind of people were really interested in this kind of information. So that led on to another exhibition that I had at MEMA, which is the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art, based up in the northeast of England in Middlesbrough. So that kind of our biggest gallery. And this wallpaper that I did for MEMA, again, you know, you see the print long before you see what the print's made out of, and people were really interested in that, is made out of the top sort of 10 offending items that I found on the beach. So again, it was kind of quantifying what I was finding, and MEMA were really interested in that. Was part of a Fragile Earth exhibition that looked at other kind of environmental, people who worked with environmental issues, of which there were kind of plenty. So yeah, along that side, things like toys, cigarette lighters, bottle lids, industrial bottle lids, things of like cotton buds, loads and loads of cotton buds, and also tampon applicators, which kind of which led to the second piece of work. So I find a lot of tampon applicators on the beach, and when I first started finding these, I was like how are they getting into the sea? So I contacted Northumbrian Water, this is what deals with our sewage in the northeast of England, and they gave me a tour around their pump works where they process the stuff that gets flushed down the toilet. That was an interesting day. Not quite as gruesome as I thought it was going to be. And they have a system, but there's so much stuff that comes through the system that they can't always deal with it. They reckon they can take 75% of waste out of the stuff that comes to the toilet. So there's a lot of baby wipes, cotton buds, tampon applicators, the occasional toothbrush, all sorts. So, and if it rains really heavily, they're allowed to not filter it out. They just basically open the floodgates and that goes straight out into the sea. So after a heavy storm here, of which on the northeast coast, you can imagine we get plenty, the sea will be littered with this debris that's come via the sewage system, which was an absolute shock to me, having never really, like most people, probably given what happens when you flush the toilet, much thought. So yeah, in a kind of bizarre twist of fate, I made this necklace that was out of all the tampon applicators that I found on the beach, and made a rough estimate that that's what one woman would use in a year. And the model is was a worker from the Northumbrian Water, and that's like inside the pump works. So I went and photographed that back where it was found. So Northumbrian Water really interested in that, because again, they want to raise awareness and discourage people from flushing things down the toilet that shouldn't go down the toilet. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting project. A part of that kind of work that I did for MEMA, I also went worked with sort of local communities around the streets of Middlesbrough, collecting the kind of plastic debris that you might find on the street, not just on the beach, because you know it is everywhere, and produced some work as well based on that. So that the image on the other side is just a collection of quite random things that we found on the streets of Middlesbrough. Always a McDonald's spoon, a little white spoon. We always find one of them. So yeah, so that was like, I did the exhibition for MEMA, and then I applied to do Durham Lumiere. So again, this was kind of a big light festival that's in the northeast of England. It's in Durham every other year. And they wanted me to use the plastics in a different way, using light, because it's a light festival. And obviously Durham is a big cathedral city. So I wanted to create these kind of plastic stained glass window type things. And so that was quite interesting, because it was a kind of completely different way of them making the prints, although I still wanted to be kind of a repetitive kaleidoscopic element to the work. So I went through my collection of stuff and realized I've got enough doubles of almost everything to create the kaleidoscopic effect without the use of Photoshop and flipping images. So yeah, these were just two windows that were a part of that kind of light festival. So again, it was kind of, you know, using the materials in a slightly different way. They get thousands of visitors to that light festival. So what I really liked about that was it gave me the opportunity to get that message across to more people. Because although I feel like, you know, when I started collecting plastic about 5-6 years ago, when I first got my dog, I think people were like, what's she doing? But yeah, there's a lot more awareness it's been raised of just the issue of how much plastic goes into the sea. However, I still find things left every day when I go to the beach. So there's still people that need to kind of, you know, we need to reach that message, because the sea is so important to, you know, it produces 70% of our oxygen. So it's really quite important. And yeah, we don't want plastic in our food and in our drinking water, which we already have, but we can do without making it any worse, I guess. So that's just kind of a close up of that image. So yeah, I find loads of dummies. People always ask me, oh, what's the most exciting thing you've ever found? Parts of dolls are just a particular favourite thing. So I haven't got a full doll, but I think I've got enough parts to make a kind of Frankenstein doll. Little toys, excuse me, are also kind of quite an interesting find. You know, I find a lot of sort of grim things, so it's nice to find something slightly more interesting. So yeah, what started off as a bit of a beach clean to become a bit of a kind of yeah, obsession with finding things. So you know, those prints, like I say, I like to do festivals. I like to do kind of festivals where I know I'm going to reach an audience that wouldn't necessarily be going into an art gallery. So it's we in Hartlepool, we have a thing called Hartlepool Waterfront Festival. It's a family festival, so people go and there's, you know, rides and entertainment and music and bars and, you know, that kind of thing. So I did some, and it's a summertime festival. So they commissioned me to do some work. So I produced, I want to say 10, I'm not sure how many there are there, deck chairs in a kind of rainbow effect. So each deck chair was made out of different coloured plastics, and there was a message on each deck chair with a fact about the kind of damage that the plastic in the sea is causing the environment. So I think on one of the deck chairs, it was like by 2050, there'll be as much plastic in the sea as fish if we don't kind of stop sort of consuming it and disposing of it in an inappropriate way. And again, like, people were really interested in that. The message was getting across, like, different, you know, sort of a range of sort of different age groups. And off the back of that, I quite often go into schools and just do talks about the things that I find. So kind of currently, I'm thinking and working on a variety of sort of different ideas. So obviously I find lots of plastic on the beach, but it's not the only thing that I find. I find lots of wood and metal and gloves. I have a massive collection of gloves. The other question I get asked a lot, so I don't know if I'm preempting some questions at the end, is where do you store all the stuff? So I used to be an art teacher. I took redundancy about 5 years ago, brought a shed that I was going to draw in. It's now stuffed full of gloves and plastic, so that we can't get in, can't get the bike in it anymore, and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, now that kind of collection of 7,000 pieces that I've got in a year, I would estimate in my shed I've probably got about 40,000 pieces of plastic, again, that I've collected from local beaches, just while out walking the dog. So the big thing is really, you know, I'm not sort of putting in I'm putting in some effort, but it's not like I'm out every day traveling the coast of the country collecting stuff. It is just a kind of tiny amount of time that I'm spending on doing that. The dog is quite sick of me stopping photographing plastic on the beach though. So yeah, so I find like metal things and wood things and textile things as well. Let's say about the gloves, work gloves, children's gloves, all sorts. So I'm kind of interested at the minute in seeing the way that the sea affects these different items. So you can see the plastic is like, it will stay as it was. So in that right hand image is a case off a Sony Walkman, probably 20 years old. Been bubbling around in the sea for a good while. And, you know, it doesn't really get damaged. The fishing wire and things doesn't really get, not fishing wire, it's a fishing reel hook, isn't it? The grey kind of object and a plug. All those things kind of pretty much look the way they did when they were made. Whereas obviously the wood and the textiles kind of decays a lot quicker. So other than arranging these objects and thinking about what I'm going to do, that's kind of, you know, where I'm at with that really. Yeah, just again, like about the plastic doesn't go away, so it will not sort of disappear. It will just get smaller and smaller and broken down into what's referred to as microplastic. And that's kind of what's in our water system, so small, and what's the fish are eating, because some of these pieces are so small. I also find loads and loads of fishing gear. So I've got like a huge collection of fishing rope. That for ages I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. Again, it's estimated that 46% of all the things that are found in the sea are related to the sort of fishing industry. So fishing rope, lobster pots, a lot like fishing line, which is really damaging to the environment. So I have started to use some of the fishing line, and I've been running workshops where we just make sort of drawing tools out of some of the bits of plastic that I find, or feathers, and tying that fishing line onto bits of driftwood. So just to kind of again highlight how much things that I'm finding on the beach, and also what we can do with the things that we find. So I feel like we've made so much stuff, we have so much stuff and so much objects and things that we don't really need. Like one of those drawing tools has got a blue plastic chip fork. So yeah, there's 3 or 4 chip shops on the seafront near where I live. So you always find chip forks. That's again used once, thrown away, and you think the manufacturing cost, the digging up the making of the plastic, the forming that into a plastic fork, the shipping of it from wherever it's made to chip shops all around the country for somebody to use it for one meal and then to throw it away is like, yeah, it's just mind-blowing, really. I mean, we can go back to the little wooden ones that we used to have that we felt a bit funny on your tongue, I thought. But so yeah, so it's like, again, highlighting just that we don't need to make more things, that you have to use the things that we've already got. So a lot of the work's just, again, it's just kind of recycling the things that I find. Oh, this is like in a kind of strange coincidence. I've got a terrible feeling that might be the last slide. I have recently, because of the pandemic, being a freelance artist became kind of quite tricky. So I got a part-time job working at Ruskin Mill School, which is kind of really environmental. Has really kind of opened up my eyes to other sort of environmental ways that we can sort of change and live in a more environmentally sort of shaped life. So I teach pottery. That is my little classroom in the corner. It's absolutely gorgeous. I'm really lucky to have this job. And we kind of work with children from who have emotional and behavioural difficulties, and they work on the land, and to see the change in those children from when they start at school to once they kind of reconnected with nature, really, which is kind of why I got a dog in the first place, to go on the beach. I had a much more stressful job, and that kind of dog walk at the end of the day, I'd be chuntering all the way there on the first mile, and all the way back I'd be like, oh, you know, I might feel much more calm now and realise that nature has a really positive effect on your mind as well as everything else. So yeah, so I work at the school, and we teach the children all about sort of animal care and where your food comes from. And the picture in this sort of top right corner, my right, I don't know how that looks on your screen, is clay. So I'm a pottery teacher there, but all the clay is in the field. So we have to go out and dig the clay. Again, it's all about kind of teaching children where, you know, the materials come from, and where all our sort of resources come from. So there was kind of flower beds in the front of my classroom, and now full of plants that the children plant and grow. And yeah, there's me happily at work hooking the sheep. So that's a real advantage to this job. So yeah, like, what can we do? I think that's kind of the big question. So I kind of doing what I can do as an artist. The only way I know how to do things is to make things out of the things that I find or be inspired by nature. So I think a lot of it's about, you know, say I go into schools and talk to children about what can you do, what can you consume less of. So one of my other least favorite things about the Coca-Cola bottle, again, one of those things that you always find on the beach. And in the UK, it's estimated that we use a mind-bending 35 million plastic bottles a day. So I always go, as how many bottles of Coke do you drink a week, or bottles of fizzy pop or whatever? You know, you'll do a school talk and the kids go, oh, I'll have one a day. So that's 7 a week. What if you only had 4? It's full of sugar anyway, it's no good for you. Oh yeah. So, you know, it's kind of those small changes. I think sometimes people think that the problem's too big. And if they make a change, even if it's a small change, it's kind of an insignificant change. But I think the real message is, you know, do something rather than go and do nothing. I can't get all the plastic out of the sea, as much as I quite like to go scuba diving and find some things that I can't get on. But I can take those things off the beach. I can highlight just the damage that we are causing the environment. I also do some volunteering for Surfers Against Sewerage. We run this Plastic Free Towns campaign. So working with some of the sort of volunteers, we've got plastic free status for Hartlepool. And you know, I've been the one who's been going into schools and talking to the children about just how much plastic there's in the sea. And we also go to local businesses and go, could you just make one change? Could you just not sell straws? Could you just not, you know, have stirrers in your drinks? And it is those kind of small changes rather than feel like we can't do anything. I've given up eating fish, more or less. Occasionally I'll be naughty, but more or less I'll stop eating fish. That was after the sort of trip to the sewage works, really. Cut down on plastic. You know, we can recycle it, but if it gets recycled, it gets recycled into more plastic. So it's better to kind of just try and not consume it, really. The picture on the other side is they're all balloon ends, mostly from McDonald's. So again, you know, people do balloon releases over the beach if there's an event, or if somebody's to commemorate somebody's life occasionally. So yeah, there's other ways to do that. Do we need balloons? Do we need to keep letting them go? So yeah, those balloon ends are one of those things that I find loads of. And then I sort of talk to people about just where those things come from. So again, like some things have been left behind. So that bottle of Coke's obviously somebody's had a drink on the beach and left the bottle behind. The McDonald's balloons, you know, occasionally they'll get let go of and they'll find their way out to the sea. Things also come down from the sewerage. So again, that's another way that people maybe don't realise that the way plastic ends up in the sea. Drains, so it goes down the drains outside and your gutters. Again, you know, all water will eventually find its way back to the sea. I find loads and loads of betting shop pens. Now, there was a betting shop reasonably close to where I live, but I thought they can't all be going to the beach and throwing the pens on the beach once they've lost the bet. So it took me a while to think, no, they're just getting them thrown in the street and they go down through the drains and out into the sea. So, you know, talking about all those different ways, people are like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. So yeah, my work's kind of been a lot about sort of making people realise that these things, once they've been used in their like temporary, often a single-use way, they wind up in the sea and are causing all this kind of damage. I think that's my last slide. Oh, yes, it is. So yeah, that's mostly about my work. I think that's my half an hour, just about. I think I did it. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Diane. I mean, it's so important to be able to get that word there. And one of the great things about art is to throw over and make your audience think. We've got a couple of questions. When you go for your digs around the beach, what's the strangest thing that you've ever found that you didn't expect to be there?
I think I mean, loads of those things are strange, aren't they? You know, you just going to wind up there. I think a full pack of Lurpak has got to be one of the strangest things. And it was so bizarre because I found that and it was full. I mean, I just binned it. I thought it had got sand in it. And you didn't know how long it had been there. So yeah, and then the next day I went and there was a fridge door. It was literally the next day. And I'm like, is that where the Lurpaks come out of, the beach fridge? You know, it's like, it's just so many kind of strange things. And old things, I say, I found a little deodorant bottle. Now you do a bit of research and it was from like like really early deodorant because the shape of the bottle was made 1950s. You think, how long's that been floating around in the sea before waves brought it in? We get storms here and it's like, you know, you will get a lot of debris with a storm. So yeah, I think a tub of Lurpak's got to be up there with one of the weirdest things. So I think.
And in your way of being able to get this message across that you know of, have you influenced any manufacturers or had a wider impact with people to stop them from littering or even just picking up their litter when they see it?
I think it's in Hartlepool. Like I say, what we've done some work for Surfers Against Sewerage with the plastic-free Hartlepool, and kind of an offshoot of that became something. There's a Facebook sort of group called the Big Town Tidy Up. That now you see people all the time out picking up litter. It's like, for I say, when I first started doing it, I had a word with the councillor. Can we not organise a beach clean? And was literally told to go give my head a shake. Those were his exact words. I'm like, it's not like hard, but like this, that was about 5 years ago. Now I see people out on the beach all the time. Let's say they have these green bags, so you know the kind of part of the Big Town Tidy Up. And I'm now going, do I need to go and have a look in that bag? They might be throwing away something good. You know, it's kind of gone like, why is there nothing on the beach? Other people are out cleaning. So yeah, I've kind of shot myself in the foot there a little bit. But yeah, I think in that sort of local way, when I do see those people, I'm like, that's really good. Now people are, they're binning stuff. It'd be better if people were kind of consuming a bit less. The big companies like supermarkets, and obviously I've emailed whoever it is who makes Tampax, and they're like, oh, we have to give our customers a choice. Like, do you need that? And I also work for it as an offshoot of this as well. It's been such a bizarre, journey. I did some work for City to See, and then I went around sort of doing the teacher training thing, training teachers how to talk to students about plastic-free periods, sort of other things. And it's like, I never thought I was going to end up having this conversation with anybody. You know, it's just, so you don't think that so many people are just flushing things and are unaware. And I have, you know, so yeah, I think people have gone, oh, especially when you go and do talk in a school, like a senior school, and everybody goes, oh my God, she's done that. You know, I like, because I didn't used to pick them up at first, but then when one of my friends was like, well, they've been through the sewage system, they've been in the sea ages, Diane, they've got to wash. So yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it's from sort of taking redundancy and thinking, I'm going to make pots, because I had trained as a potter, to picking up all the rubbish and eventually getting a job as a pottery teacher has been really, you don't know what's going to be around the next corner, literally, do you?
No, that's fantastic. That's such a brilliant journey to be on as well.
Yeah, it is. It's been crazy, but good, but great. I met loads of people that I wouldn't have met and had loads of conversations, and people have gone, oh yeah. So I think in you know, there's been those conversations when I've done sort of let's say community exhibitions where people have gone, I didn't even realise, you know, how bad it was. That this is just your local beaches, and that I'm not from Hartlepool, but that I lived here for 30 years. And that local person is going, it's not that hard. Just think about what you buy and think about how you're disposing of it. So hopefully, yeah, I've made a bit of difference. I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I think you have.
I've also made a living out of collecting rubbish for the last few years. I'm like, oh, I'm a glorified like bin man. It's like crazy.
Oh, fantastic. And what sort of responses have you had from the audience when you talk about the ages of the plastic and the actual sheer amount that's being thrown away?
Yeah, I think people are genuinely shocked. And like I say, you know, I will always say, like, you know, like I said in the talk, it's just me out with the dog. I'm not, and I have to take the dog for a walk every day. It's not like I'm really on a, you know, sort of, I'm out 24/7 or anything. This is like a lot of stuff for one woman to find while she's out walking her dog. So they're always like, oh God, you found all that. So yeah. And just the range of objects. And sometimes you find things you don't even know what they are. So I find loads of these like things, and I have Instagram. So I was like put on now, follow loads of other people who collect plastic. And like those shotgun cartridges, well, I wouldn't have known that was a shotgun cartridge. So I have loads and loads of them. Again, you know, they're probably just washing down rivers. So it's raised my awareness of where things are coming from, as well as sort of, you know, me passing that message on to other people. But yeah, it's like, it's the volume, it's what those things are, and it's that I've managed to do that sort of just by myself.
Yeah. And have you ever visited a recycling centre? Because how much is actually recycled?
As you know, that's like such a like massive issue. It changes from area to area. So as part of sort of our plastic free Hartlepool mission, yeah, we've been to recycling centres in Hartlepool. A lot of it's just burnt for energy, so it doesn't even get recycled. A tiny amount of what some kind of all the plastic bottles we use, only 9% are getting recycled. I think that's the fact. It's like a tiny amount. And you know, like I say, if they're getting recycled, what are they getting recycled back into? They're not going to be turned into like diamonds. They're just going to be turned into cheaper plastic. And another ironic twist of face, my son is like a polymer chemist, so he makes plastic. I'm like, I've disowned you. And he's like, you know, every time, because he knows the science of it, every time you recycle plastic, it gets less like good. It becomes less usable. So it just gets, you know, like bottle will become a cheap plastic bag, will become a cheaper plastic bag. It does not, it degrades every sort of time you recycle it. Whereas glass, you know, you can, and sort of tin cans, like you used to drink Coke out of a tin can, when you recycle it, it doesn't lose its kind of function in the same way. So yeah, so like I recycle. I'm not like, you know, it's very difficult to go to the shops and avoid plastic. It's not made easier for us, I think.
And do you know if drain water is unfiltered? Because people throw cigarette butts, they throw packets and all of that down there.
Yeah, so the water from your drains goes the same, and eventually ends up in the same pipes as the water from your toilet. So that will all get kind of, some of it gets filtered. But like I was saying about when it rains, which it does a lot, doesn't it, here, Northumbrian Water are like well within their rights, not against law, for them to just open the floodgates and let out whatever, because they can't cope with the volume of water that's coming through the system, you know, if it's a heavy rain. And if they didn't, all that stuff would just come back up through your toilet, or up your drains and what have you. So yeah, all that stuff, the scrap butts and whatever other litters in the street will get washed out to sea, the same as the stuff, like all your water, the river, the toilet, the drains, all ends up back in the sea eventually. So those are items that I find, you think the tampon applicators have been on a journey, haven't they? They've been through that system, through the sewerage system, they shoot it about 2-3 miles out at sea. And then I go to Northumberland Water, the tide will bring things back in, don't you? And it kind of, it comes back in, but it's not one or two. That necklace I made, there was 200 and something on that necklace. I can't quite remember how I did the maths. Yeah, so that was like me drilling holes in all of that. Kids coming in, what are you doing now? But that isn't anything I can collect after a bad rain on one of our beaches. There isn't a beach that's protected, so it's not a bathing beach, so you can do what you want basically, or the water companies can put what they want out there. I can find hundreds of them, literally hundreds, and it's like, it's just, you don't need to use them, you don't need to flush them. It's crazy.
That's absolute madness.
I quite like going to secondary schools and putting that image up and seeing everybody's jaw at the floor.
Well, what's the point in art if you can't have a bit of fun with it?
Yeah, shock tactics. So yeah, it's good. It has been really, from me literally going, getting a dog. Be careful of getting a dog, would be my advice. It's led to a completely sort of change in direction, my own work. So I'm a textile designer. I used to draw plants and flowers and put them into repeats. I was a textiles teacher for years. To kind of just making those patterns out of the stuff that I find, to becoming like, borderline obsessed now. Rubbish.
And the final question for you is, what's the biggest thing you have learned on your journey?
Oh gosh. But I think from an artistic point of view is just to be open to your work changing direction, just to be open to having sort of new ideas. And I'm like going and talking about what you're doing. I'm not like, I'm going to say I'm shy, that would be lying, but it's not kind of like naturally within me to go out and do that. But I just felt so passionate about having something to talk about. But yeah, just it's led to a completely different direction, and not to be kind of stuck in your ways about anything. I don't know if that's also, yeah, I don't know if that's it. I think that's the main thing.
I think that's fantastic advice for people that are listening as well.
I think, you do find some people, they do that one thing, don't they? And they do that one thing, and there's no that's nothing, that's fine, that's great. But I've just kind of let it happen rather than having a plan.
Yeah.
Probably, and I think some people think, especially like as a teacher, I used to teach in FE, those kids thought they'd got to know what they wanted to do when they left, and they're going to go to university, they've got to know. And I'm like, you don't know what's going to happen next. You know what you're going to do. Kind of, I won't say go with the flow, but let things like maybe materialize that you wouldn't be I'm still experimenting, and I'm 52, so who knows what's going to happen next.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. And now we're going to hand over to Tessa Coe.
Okay, so I'm a case in point. I haven't stuck to one thing either. I started off life as a scientist. So I was at Imperial College for 8 years, and then I worked at various labs in industry for a while. But for the last 20 years or so, I've been a painter. And this is a bit of a quick visit round an exhibition that I had just before the pandemic hit. And it's about climate change, but about the environment really, and ecosystems. And it's my little celebration, I think, of the things that I've learned about ecology while I've been painting. So for me, both the science and the painting are about curiosity. They're about finding out what's going on and how I feel about it, really, but just in different ways. So the folks I've spoken to about some of these ideas are James Dyke and Tina Roos at Southampton and at Exeter for James. So this first painting is a little bit apocalyptic. It's called Warming World, and it didn't start this way. It was very, none of my paintings start how they end up. I'm very much a suck it and see kind of person when I'm painting. So I start with a particular color, and I will draw over the undercoat very loosely and in black, and then I'll respond to that on the canvas. So that's how I get going, really. So this painting is actually on its side when I was working on it initially, and it didn't do anything with me at all. I had no idea what I was doing. But one day I turned it up this way, and I had started putting the orange underneath, and suddenly it all made sense. So for me, this is the image of our little blue planet, very busy blue planet, barreling through space, burning up. So it's not a particularly comforting view, but we'll address what we can, just to stay honest, and we'll address what we can do. It's still not too late to do something about this problem. Okay, so I'm going to start with light, mostly because the series began with me putting yellow underneath for a lot of paintings, but suddenly I became very interested in how life uses light. So we have this amazing photosynthesis going on, which produces our food. So we have in a little ecosystem, if you think of building an ecosystem, you have light pouring in, and you have things called producers, so that plants are producing the things that can be eaten. And then we have consumers, so we have little animals that eat the plants. And then we have more consumers that eat the consumers and the plants, and so on and so on. And you build a food web out of that. And at the top, very often, there's an apex predator who just keeps a lid on the whole thing. And it's a whole, it's a working system. So this painting started off with me painting lots of greys. I was interested in the way the greys worked against the yellows, and it really got going for me, this painting, when I noticed that there was this sharp line going from top left down past the middle, and then a gap. And so this was for me just a little idea fleeting through my head that said, this is how the light gets in. We're going to have a response here. Something magical is going to happen. So, I've forgotten somebody in the ecosystem, very, very important group called decomposers. Without the decomposers, these are the bacteria and the fungi and the little creatures that take all the detritus of what we've been doing, and when they can, they break it down and turn it into soil or whatever. So they are vital. So what can we do about this? How can we utilize this precious magical thing that happens on our planet and is saving us? So photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide out of the air, makes the sugars that we're going to need to eat, and gives us oxygen to breathe. So we can save our soils. We're creating deserts in our soils by huge monocultures sprayed with chemicals. So we really need to stop doing that and change our farming practices. Now, this is a big ask, but it's an exciting ask. And we can plant forests, so we can plant more trees to suck up more carbon dioxide and so on. And we can rewild our landscape, so we can be a lot less fussy and tidy and just stop using scrub as if it's a dirty word, but appreciate the fact that nature's very good at this stuff. And we're just novices, really. So that's where I started with my little tour of ecology. So this painting is called Live Ocean. So this started with me playing with lots of blues and enjoying all the colors, all the different shades of blue and tones. I was reading about a process called upwelling. So my working practice is to play around and read or listen or whatever, and allow the ideas and the paintings to sort of catch up with each other and develop. So I was reading about something called upwelling, and I'd never heard of this before. And it's a process whereby in the ocean, there are big currents, and the ocean will wash up against a coastline. And with that washing up comes a lot of the sediment at the bottom of the ocean. Now that's very nutrient rich because there's been a lot of decomposers at work. So there is a lot of nutrient in the bottom of the ocean there. And as it washes up against the coast, that nutrient comes to the surface. Now the sea at the ocean has got lots of tiny, minute little creatures called phytoplankton. So there's an entire zoo of them. There's all sorts of shapes and sizes and what have you. And they are capable of doing photosynthesis as well, which is a really amazing thing. But what they can't do is... so the children get from photo. So what they can't do, they can't do their photosynthesis if they don't have any nutrient. So as the nutrient comes up to the surface, there's a great explosion of phytoplankton and a great explosion of sea life. And that's where most of the sea life comes from. I didn't know that. It's just a magical thing that goes on all the time without you knowing. So as Diane was saying, 2/3 of the planet's surface is ocean. So it's clearly a very big part of what's going on this planet. But we are doing all sorts of things as well as polluting them. We're raising the temperature of the ocean, which means a lot of creatures are finding that their food sources have moved. We're changing the acidity all the time. We're pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which dissolves in the ocean, makes it more acid. And one of the byproducts of that is that shellfish can't actually produce their shells anymore because they can't do that in an acid environment. And we're changing the salinity of the ocean. We're changing by melting the ice caps, we're actually changing how much dissolved salt there is. And this affects the big currents that are going round and round our planet. And we know about this current because we have the Gulf Stream coming up from the south, keeping the UK warmer than it's got any right to be. So, so these are big, big issues that we are affecting. So if we're going to increase our photosynthesis in the ocean, we could perhaps protect our coastal waters better and allow seagrass to grow, which also photosynthesizes. We could stop all the unsustainable fishing and the dredging of the ocean floors, and we could stop using fossil fuels. Ooh, why is that not working? So this is called Heading for Spring. So this painting started off as just blue and white. That was all that was going on for a long time. I was playing around, lots of play, lots of line, lots of dots, lots of little squiggles that could be creatures or whatever. And then one day, those darker, large areas turned up. And I suddenly thought, gosh, those could be something that was on the weather chart. So I added some more of them. And I was reading my RSPB magazine at the time, and I was reading about journeys that birds make in migration. And we live in Southampton here, and I know that some of the birds from around here go all the way to South Africa and back every year, looking for food, looking for what they need. Now these are very fragile journeys at the best of times, but as we are so busy with our planet, we're not thinking about them at all, and land uses change, and storms are getting stronger, and so these journeys are getting more and more fragile. And we're also changing the seasons. This whole thing about the climate change is that the seasons are actually getting either longer or shorter. So spring turns up quite often these days much sooner than it used to, and summer lasts longer. And this is a problem to a lot of ecosystems, because over the millennia, plants and their pollinators have learned to be in sync with one another, so they're around at the same time. So if we change the temperature, for example, and the all the little insects arrive too early and the plant isn't ready, then things will fall apart. So that's a really big issue. That whole how ecosystems fall apart is a really big issue, and people are doing lots of research on this. But it means that some things can move with the climate, but a lot of things can't. So some things can move north if they need to move north to get some, cooler for whatever reason, but a lot of things can't. So we're kind of taking our ecosystems apart in a somewhat unpredictable way. Now, this is a big issue, and the only thing I could think of that we can say about this is that we need to stop using fossil fuels now, as soon as we possibly can, because nothing small is going to affect this process. So I've spent a lot of time wondering about water and where it goes and all the rest of it too. This slide is about wetlands. So I garden, I'm a keen organic gardener, on the water meadows of the River Test. And I'm between a very large port city and a national park. And there's a lot of friction between those, as you can imagine. And we're sort of in the middle. So I see a lot of the sort of pollution and difficult ideas that go with being a human community. So anyway, this painting, I don't remember quite how it started, but it really came to life for me with that big X that you can see in orange there. When I drew my attention to that, I suddenly saw that I had something that could be sky and something that could be ocean, and there was the wind and the soil and the river at the bottom. And so the whole thing kind of came from that juxtaposition of things. Wetlands, it turns out, store enormous amounts of carbon. So you have, in my kind of wetland here on the Test, you have the river coming down and meeting the sea. And as rivers meet the ocean, they slow down and they spread out. And so our water meadows are for flooding. That's kind of, the process that has happened over the millennia. So in spreading out, all the goodness that has come down with the river, all the silt gets spread out and built up. So you get huge amounts of stored carbon in your soil in these environments. You have inland wetlands too. So UK has a lot of peat bogs, it turns out. We have a very unfair share, but sadly we've not looked after them, and a lot of them are degraded. And so are not storing the carbon that they hold. So I believe they're starting to do something about that, but it's a very small beginning. So what can we do? This is a more sort of human-sized problem that we could perhaps contribute to. So let's not use peat. Let's garden without peat, and let's ask our horticulturists to do the same. There's no need these days because people have been beavering away, making things work very well without using peat. Let's not drain our wetlands. Let's complain bitterly when wetlands get drained in order to put houses on them, because there's absolutely no need to do that. And let's prevent runoff. As Diane was saying, there's a lot of runoff. This year has seen quite a lot of sewage spills into the rivers. And cities do generate a lot of pollutants into our ocean and into our rivers. So there are things that we can do, and we can also stop all the farm chemicals going into our rivers as well, because they destroy a lot of life. Oh goodness, going backwards. Let's see how we're doing for time. So this painting is called Mother Tree, and it started its life as a rather red and boring landscape. The initial drawing that went with it was a lot of lines all over the canvas. I was feeling very expansive that day, I think. So a lot of lines interconnecting, and there's a lot of pattern that went went with it. At the end of the day, however, I looked at it and I thought, this really isn't telling me anything. I'm not getting anything out of this. So instead of whiting the whole thing over, which I do from time to time, I decided I'd just white over bits that I didn't like the look of. So I did that. And then towards the middle of the painting, I added some purple bits because I thought I needed a sort of nice contrast color to the greens. And then I turned it into the orientation that it is now, because it was on its side. And I suddenly realized this is a tree, this is going to be a tree. So I let it be a tree. And the lines that were in the painting anchored the tree into the ground. And that suddenly made a lot of sense to me. So I've read quite a bit about trees, and they've become very, very much part of the climate change story, because they do a lot of photosynthesis, and they do, as long as they're living and not chopped up, store an awful lot of carbon. But they're totally magical. I mean, they're just a little ecosystem in their own right. There are so many creatures that live around and on them. And they are nurturing to not only themselves in the soil, but to others. So it's become quite a topic of conversation. I don't know whether you've heard, but there are these fungi that live around the roots of plants, in particular trees. And they go off in all directions. These networks of fungi go off in all directions looking for minerals which the tree needs or the plant needs. So the tree has this wonderful resource to help it grow, and in return gives the fungi some sugar to thrive itself. So in forests, trees tend to live in community. They literally support one another and all the other constituent parts of the growth. And they can do that in normal landscape too, because an awful lot of plants have these mycorrhizal fungi too. And there's a brilliant piece of research I saw the other day where they had taken soil from within a wood, soil from within a hedge, soil from the edge of a conventionally farmed arable field, and soil from the middle of a conventionally farmed arable field, and grown wheat in each section. And the size of the wheat was so much bigger in the soil that was from the wood than it sort of literally went down towards the center of the field soil, which was the smallest. And some of that is to do with the fact that, you know, soils are essentially dead if they are sprayed to within an inch of their lives. The community underneath is impoverished by doing that, because soils are like a little zoo of creatures in their own right. But also because the conventional tilling of the soil disrupts all the little conversations that are going on via these fungi. So I thought that was an amazing thing. So my plea that goes through this painting is we need to use our land better. And there are lots of new techniques, well, not new old techniques really, that people are investigating all over the world, like permaculture and don't dig and agroforestry and regenerative agriculture. There are lots of exciting things happening to prevent us producing food, essentially making our soil into a desert. So let's also plant lots of trees, but let's plant the right tree in the right place. Lots of monocultures of pines are very good for zapping quite a lot of carbon quickly, but if you use them all, then that's the carbon out of the system again. And we are cutting down ancient forests in order to build train lines and so on, and that's not reproducible. You cannot recreate an ancient forest, the ecosystem that goes with it, by just planting a whole bunch of new trees. That's just not an equation of any kind. So right tree in the right place. If you put a tree in the right place, it can actually help you prevent flooding. So there are lots and lots of things to do with trees, and I could go on and on. I mustn't. Right, this is called Apex, and this may not be finished. I haven't quite decided yet whether this painting's finished or not. It was made quite recently, and instead of playing, as I normally do, drawing, playing and seeing what turns up, in this instance I decided to try to build my own ecosystem on the canvas. So I put some soil in the bottom right hand corner, the sun top right, ocean on the left at the top, and some greenery down the bottom. And I let it all just sort of, you know, play with each other. And running through the painting, there is those red marks, those orange marks. And that, for me, became the energy in the system. So you can think of an ecosystem as passing energy on. So it starts with the sun, which then gets converted by the plants, which then goes to animals and so on, and eventually to us. So that was my little model there, and I was playing around with it. And then one day I noticed that something had turned up. Oh, there's a river actually going through the middle as well. My pointer doesn't work when I'm using PowerPoint, so I can't actually show you, but if you look to the top right-hand corner, what's notionally the sun, and travel diagonally downwards, you may be able to see, or you may not, I don't know, be able to see what I can see is that as a little head of a bird. So it's the first orange bit you come to, the little yellow, and there's a little eye, and there's a hooked beak, and below is his claw. And the river becomes part of his wing, and then there are more feathers going down. So I don't normally do this, but when he turned up, he turned up when I was painting in a different direction. It was only when I turned it around I noticed, and I was really pleased to see him, because it suddenly made everything make sense, because he's made out of a jigsaw of everything that's around him. So that made me feel happy. I was very happy with that outcome. So I think that painting may just stay like that because of that, just because of that happenstance. But as I've been saying lots of times, we need to save our soils so that these ecosystems function. We need to use safer common chemicals. I know we use buckets of plastic all the time, but we also use some pretty pernicious things. And these chemicals can actually live in the environment forever, essentially. They're just not going to break down. So some of them, and they're still legal. So I've gone back to the idea of needing better farm practices. And I find this really exciting, I have to say. Being an organic gardener, I'm really into all of this. And so I'm very excited by the creativity that people are showing and the open-mindedness that people are showing. Vested interests are clearly not so keen, but you know, there's a lot of creativity to be had there. And we can green our cities. I think that is starting to happen a bit. We're getting the odd green roof and the odd beehive and little allotments and what have you, and that's great. But we could do so much more. There's this lovely construction in Milan, in Italy, and it's called Bosco Verticale, and it's 2 tower blocks. They have been designed from the word go to enable each balcony. So every floor has balconies all the way around, all the way up. And these balconies are strong enough to support trees. So it's essentially a vertical forest, and people have they have the shade from the trees, because it's hot in Milan in the summer. They have shade from the trees, and they have fruit trees, they have birds, and it's an absolutely magical setup. Why aren't we doing more of that? It is such a pleasure. Oh, they've got also a very clever watering system. I can't remember, it's a very passive, clever watering system to make it using grey water. So we could green our cities. We could, with all our bird feeding over lockdown, I think we've increased the blue tip population enormously. And that's good. That is great. So we don't stop doing it. As long as you do, yeah, don't stop doing it. But there are many, many more things that we could do to make our environment much more pleasant, but also utilize nature, get nature on our side. We've done so much to harm. So let's get nature on our side. Last slide. This painting was another one of these ones that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I had a notional thing going with water and air and light and earth. But it had lots of marks that took me round and round, and I was trying to resist going round and round, but I eventually capitulated. And what finally gave me the idea for the title was the little line of blue dots that go from the middle of the left-hand side down, and to the bottom on the right. And when I did that, I suddenly felt that there was a bit of tension there, and something was possible to move. This was some kind of balance. And that's what we've lost. We've lost our balance. We've lost our sweet spot. So that can be, a depressing thought, but we are creative individuals, and we have agency, and we can change things. Okay. The other thing that comes with this painting is the idea of all the huge cycles that there are in nature: water and carbon and nitrogen, phosphorus, all the food webs and the ecosystems. This amazing blue planet that we live on, it's a living planet. And so we need to be a creative and helpful part of that. So what can we do? We can reduce our own impact. We can stop buying too much stuff, as Diane would say. We really don't need as much stuff as we've got, and almost all the transport is, stuff being made somewhere, taken, across the ocean to somewhere else. So we don't need all that stuff, and we can join in. We can actually volunteer and plant trees and join the RSPB, or there are lots and lots of different societies and groups in the UK. And it's good to be out, and it's good to be helping, and it's good to have the conversation and affect other people, really. And we can press for real change. We've got COP26 coming up. A lot of nice words are going to be said. One deeply, deeply hopes that real things will happen. And the only people who are going to make that happen are us, by pressuring the people who have the power to take the right steps and to ignore the vested interests, and actually, or encourage the vested interests to do the right thing. Perhaps that's a better thing to say. But anyway, I think that that's the most important thing that we can do. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's a long story, really.
That's brilliant, Tessa. It was really good to hear about all your artworks and how the ecosystems are so important, and what we can actually do to help it and undo all of our wrong that we have been doing to the environment so far. And when you make your paintings, how do you choose the lines of your initial sketches? Do you do it from the energy, or is there a specific thing in mind that you're trying to get to?
No, it's really very much playing. So I make lots of I use a dropper, actually, and I make lots of marks, and then I respond to those, and then I take paint and I literally just start putting paint down and then respond to that. And so I'm constantly playing with all of it like a huge jigsaw puzzle. And that's really why the surfaces look the way they do, because I feel that that's exactly how life is. It's this enormous jigsaw puzzle of jigsaw puzzles. And so I'm kind of mimicking that and just responding and keeping going.
Brilliant. We've got wonderful multifaceted art, which seems to remarkably positive and bright despite the sad and gloomy topics that they're on about. Is this a intentional thing that you do?
It is, really. Part of making these paintings is me finding out what's going on. So I'm learning, I'm reading all the time about, whatever. And as I think, gosh, that could be something, I'll go and try and find out what that something might be. And the more I learn about ecology and the whole planet, really, the more magical it all seems, the more absolutely mind-blowing it is. So for me, these are celebrations. Okay, that's what they are. And having said that, the message is difficult, but we are creative people. We can do something about this. We don't, we have to do something about this, but we still have the possibility of doing that. It's not quite too late.
Yes, it's true. There is still time, and people need to start doing as much as they can, starting with themselves. And your art is quite complex. So how do you help people understand what there are about when you're not there?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because I don't, there's not a one-to-one correspondence between anything that is on a painting and anything in the real world. So it's kind of, it's difficult. And the exhibition I had this last February, I put text next to the paintings, and that did work a little bit, I think. And some people really were good at reading it, and some people not so much. But I actually like to be in some of the time in the gallery myself and talk to people about it. Ask them what they see and just say what I was feeling at the time, or what I was, going through my head at the time. And it's I don't know what else you do, really. It doesn't matter if they don't don't like the painting, but like the message, or be like the painting and don't like the message, or it's a difficult one, and I'm sure all artists struggle with this in one way or another.
And do you research and pick a topic that you want to paint about, or do you paint and then research more upon the topics, such as if you were doing the moorlands or the tree of life?
Exactly. So something turns up, and then I'll go off and I've got to know enough to actually recognize that something's turned up, and then go off and read about it and try to understand a bit better. And then as I paint more, I end up with more questions. So it's very much a system like that.
It's fantastic. It's almost like you're having a conversation with your artwork, allowing it to show what it wants to do whilst putting in a little bit for it to come across a little bit more.
That's exactly how I think about it. It's a conversation.
Fantastic. And I have both cellular and universal interpretations of your work. How do you manage to get both perspectives blended in so successfully?
I missed the beginning of that, sorry.
I have both a cellular and universal interpretation of your work. How do you blend them?
How do you blend them? Well, the magic thing about abstract art is I'm not actually telling you what scale anything is. So I'm and you can distort whatever you like, can't you? So I don't know that I'm totally blending things. The cellular stuff, I have done quite a lot of paintings about microbiology, but that's a whole different set of stuff. So I'm not really sure what I can say in answer to that. I'm not really sure. Like I say, you can play with scale anyway, and yeah, I'm not sure.
That's all right. And is it acrylic paints that you use?
It is. Yes, I'm afraid they're plastic. But I don't intend them to come off. I do overpaint paintings and start again rather than throw them away. Yes, I realize that this isn't a particularly environmental medium, but you can't do everything.
And we've got what a great series of talks. You're great, and sadly I have to go away, but you're brilliant with the idea of the messages that bacteria seep into general consciousness. That's quite a positive message just come on. And how do you choose when your artwork is done? Because like you say, your last one, you don't know whether or not it will be.
There's always something that I draw. It's like a truce at the end. You know, you kind of, occasionally, there's one in the living room that I've had on the wall for about 3 months now, perhaps more, and I'm going to have another go at that. But you can't just have a little go, can you? You go one little mark, and the entire lot has to change in the way I work. So I think at some point, if you live with them long enough, you just think, well, that's not doing it for me. I've got to change that.
And finally, what's your one wish for the planet if you could just magically make something happen?
Oh God. I think my wish would be that we would totally rethink GDP, that we wouldn't measure our wealth or anything by using GDP. GDP is an old concept for, the sort of 1900s. It's not very useful at the moment. It's causing an enormous amount of waste, bonkers waste. And so, and huge inequalities. And I would just scrap GDP and go for wellness, go for the health of your community and your environment. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's
that's fantastic if that could happen. Maybe one day, you never know. Thank you so much for your talk.
Pleasure.
It was really eye-opening, and it was just fantastic to listen about. So we're going on to Louise Beer, and she is doing a live sound piece through a separate software. So there is a web link I've just put into the group chat with the password Galaxy with a capital G. If you have to leave Zoom, you can come back on after the 30 minutes of the sound piece using the same link you came on. If you have any problems, please email me through tebbsgallery@gmail.com or message me through Instagram, and I'll be there to help you out to either get back into Zoom or to go over to the other platform.
Hello and welcome to A Memory of Darkness. I am Louise Beer. We have an audience from across the world tonight for this collective listening experience. Thank you for joining in. I'm talking to you from Margate in England. Please take a moment to close the curtains. If you aren't already using headphones, please switch to these now. Then find a comfortable place to sit or lie down and put your eye mask on. The sound piece you'll hear tonight is created purely from my field recordings of bird song at Hiniwai Reserve on the Banks Peninsula in the South Island of Aotearoa in New Zealand. This piece depicts my experience of both wonderment and environmental grief in equal measure. Over the next minute, I would like to invite you to think about the last time that you looked up into a clear night sky and outwards into our galaxy. Take a few deep breaths whilst you think about the endless Milky Way. Carl Sagan wrote in Pale Blue Dot, "Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Thank you for being part of this global listening experience. This was a memory of darkness."
Hi, Louise. That was fantastic. I think everyone's managed to drop back on.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
It was really interesting. Got some comments on how atmospheric it was and the way that the bird songs were just phenomenal to listen to, really. Do you think cultures that really see the night sky with no air or light pollution behave and feel differently?
Yes, well, that's a really interesting question and something that I'm looking at with my research, because I grew up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where there are just magnificent views of the night sky. And I've always wondered if I would have had a different sort of outlook on life if I didn't have that view growing up, and also have the sort of constant view of imposing landscape as I had in central Otago, where I spent a lot of time. So yes, one of the primary questions that I'm looking at with my future work and current work is how the view of the night sky impacts the way that we value the natural world, and if we can no longer see the galaxy in the distance, how that will affect our behaviour, because we won't have anything to compare our sort of oasis of life with against the lifeless or lifeless seeming universe that we can see.
That's really interesting. Sorry, the thoughts just flown out my mind just then. It's really interesting how you talk about that there is no help out there and we have to do it to ourselves and first look to ourselves. And how do you think that we might be able to start making an impact? How do you think we're going to start making a difference?
Well, for me, it really comes down to experiencing incredible night skies in different places across the UK, and particularly in New Zealand, where the Milky Way rises slightly higher into the centre of the sky, so you tend to see a lot more stars. But also just having the experience of local nature as well, whether that's just a small garden with grass and the interactions with insects and birds, that can be really transformative, I think. But primarily, I think it's about trying to grasp that sense of wonder about the natural world and realizing that that is what you're affecting through the choices that we make.
That's really true. And with the whole coronavirus, there's been images showing up that because everyone's switching off, like where there was thick smog, it's clearing the air, it's sorting out the ozone. And it's had just such a positive impact. What have your thoughts been on that sort of them stories coming out?
Yeah, I think it's been a really fantastic period where people have paused. I mean, you know, there have been good elements of COVID, obviously. Most of it has been dreadful for lots of people. But one of the good things is that people have really paused from their normal life, I guess, and been able to experience or been open to experiencing the kind of interaction with nature that otherwise would have been pushed aside for everything else that you had to do that day. So for me, I have been going on lots of nighttime walks in Margate, where I am at the moment, and just looking into the night sky and seeing the changes in the moon have just been a really wonderful experience. And I know that lots of other people have also been doing things like that, and also growing plants and just watching the seasons change, I guess, as we go through this collectively. Yeah,
that's fantastic. And there's a question here with the ideas of the night sky. How did you choose the sounds for that soundtrack? Soundtrack, in fact.
So I can explain a little bit about how it happened. I was on a residency in the South Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand, in a city called Christchurch. And I went out to a nature reserve called Hiniwai Reserve, and it's where they're trying to regenerate the native forest because so much of it has been lost across New Zealand. And with the loss of the native forests, also we've lost so many of our native birds which don't exist anywhere else on the planet. So I was there to do some sound recording for an exhibition that I have with my collective, Pale Blue Dot Collective, coming up next year at the Arts Centre Te Matatiki Tui Ora in Christchurch, about the loss of native birds through human occupation of New Zealand. Anyway, so I was there with this big focus on recording the bird song in this amazingly remote place on a sort of volcanic outcrop on the edge of the country. And I was there on my own, and I was in like such a remote place. I was staying in a shed, basically, with nobody else anywhere, nothing visible. There was a couple of park rangers who take care of the forest about 5 minutes away, but there was no cell phone reception or anything. It was such a remote experience. And anyway, I had been recording some birdsong in the forest, and then the night came and the sun started to set, and it was just the most incredible night sky I've ever seen. And because of the way that it looked out towards the Pacific Ocean. And I was on my own, and it's really unusual for me to be on my own looking out at the night sky. I'm often with my partner or with artists that I work with. And anyway, it really felt like I was sort of facing the night sky. And I just had this overwhelming sense of environmental grief that we have spent all these thousands of years of knowledge building to understand what we can see looking out into the night sky. And with all that knowledge, we understand how valuable the life on Earth is, and we're still knowingly causing its destruction. So that's how the sound piece came about. I was there to record the birdsong, which I did, and then I came back here, and with my collaborator John Hooper, we created this piece together about you. So the sound piece is made just of the birdsong, so it's just manipulated pitch and speed of the birdsong to create the piece. So yeah.
Wow, that's actually such a fascinating story. And we do have a sense of importance that we do need to look after the wildlife, because all wildlife is connected in some way or other along the food chain. And I mean, art is a very good way to bring life to that. And we've got a comment. I think it's a wonderful combination of astronomy and ecology, and it is.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, so I made this whilst I was on a different residency with the Delphina Foundation, and the idea of it was to try and get people to experience an artwork in their own homes, rather, because when I made it, everything was closed, obviously. And I really loved that format of, again, being alone, experiencing an artwork. Yeah, and just trying to think about, like, looking up into the night sky and about Earth being in sort of the depths of space, and trying to think about how you fit into the grand scheme of things and what we need to do to change our direction.
And how was it that changed to be able to bring artwork to people's home rather than the generic thing of bringing it to an exhibition?
Yeah, I think it's been really special, actually. So on the website, I have a link to a form that you can fill out about your memory of looking into the Milky Way and how the piece of work sort of made you feel. And I've had such really amazing feedback of people's sort of innermost emotions about also, like, the loss of natural darkness, because that's a primary focus of my practice as well. How the loss of natural darkness makes us see the environment differently, but also that loss of natural darkness has a massive impact on the flora and fauna as well. So I think it's been a great escape for people to, again, step outside of their lives and just sort of pause for a minute and think about the bigger questions, I guess.
It's a really interesting way of doing it. And I mean, even they say camping resets your body clock, and it's the night sky and the sunrise and sunset that does that to you.
Yeah, I mean, natural darkness is integral for brain development and things like that as well, but the effect on animals breeding and feeding, and it's appalling that we don't even really think about it as a type of pollution, but it's devastating.
It's very true. And I mean, it is definitely something that needs to be talked about, because it isn't talked about very much at all, especially not in the UK and countries like that where they don't have to think about it.
Yeah, well, there's more dark skies coming up across the UK, which is really, really good, but I think we've got a long way to go. Yeah, and hopefully people are becoming more aware of it though.
And hopefully we'll be able to get to that point where we don't need to do any more steps, because we've got to the perfect balance.
Yeah, exactly. I actually, just one example of a light outside my flat. I don't know if I keep accidentally looking out because I can see a beautiful view of the water in Margate here. But we had a big light when we first moved here, a big light that pointed upwards and lit up the whole sort of sky, kind of air around the light. And a couple of years ago, they changed it to a downward pointing light, and it has completely transformed our view at nighttime. And that's just one light with us looking at it. So yeah, small changes can make a really big impact for the creatures who live within our human manipulated world that we've created.
That's brilliant. And yeah, it really is the small changes that can make a difference. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your sound piece with us today. It was so atmospheric and so wonderful to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
And now we'll pass it over to Caroline Hyde-Brown.
Hello there. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, Kirstie. I'm a textile artist, and at the moment I'm looking at environmental food security. I'm studying for a master's degree at Norwich University of the Arts. So my work at the moment is primarily about food security. I'm working at John Innes Research Centre in Norwich, and I'm working with a couple of scientists who are looking at reducing the toxin in a Neolithic crop called grass pea. The grass pea is grown across sort of vast swathes of Ethiopia, India, and Africa. It's known as an insurance crop because it's the only drought-resistant crop in the world. So I'm primarily looking at recreating surfaces and textiles with various surfaces combined and raw plant material combined with this crop. We were just chatting about light, which was interesting because this is actually the grass pea growing in one of the glass houses at John Innes. And what they did was, for the first time last year, well, in 2019 actually, the early part of 2020, they checked the growth of the grass pea and they'd installed some daylight bulbs. So it was really interesting to see the way the grass pea had grown in just this massive tangle of growth. They'd almost sort of reached up towards the daylight bulb because they were different type of light compared to the artificial light that used to be installed. So it was quite hard when we harvested about 200 crops in January, just before lockdown last year. And I was able to sort of store the residue in large bags and dry it out. And that's what I've been looking at for the last year or so. This is another one of the glass houses. This is where they grow the wheat and the barley. I'm actually studying the root residue as well. I'm looking at patterns of root growth, and this is actually a slide of a global crop diversity, sort of a global range of crops. What John Innes' role is, they tend to do the genome sequencing, and they're looking by sequencing and I'm not a scientist, but by looking at extracting the DNA from each of the various crops, they're looking at reducing this toxin and producing ranges of crop that people can actually eat. Because some of these people that live in areas where this crop is grown are some of the poorest farming communities in the world. So the grass pea is on the left-hand side. It's actually related to the sweet pea, so it's quite familiar. The controlled root growth studies, I tend to use a lot of observation with my work. I tend to work quite slowly, watch the seed pods sort of just developing and growing. These are actually grass pea, young grass pea that are growing in agar flasks. And what they do is they extract the sugar from the agar, and the root growth develops around the bottom of the agar flask. I also look at controlled root growth studies. So these ones were actually placed in a sort of conventional sort of seedling tray, and I left them for about 6 months and just used the root growth to give me inspiration for thread work. You can see here where the roots grow as well in a controlled study in a pot. So this is a photograph of the way the roots actually entangle sort of around in the different patterns. So I'm also interested in pattern and design of the roots. So when I do my embroidery studies and textile surfaces, I can look at the various elements of pattern and rhizobial activity. This is where I looked at studying the roots and seeing. I set up an experiment where I had a little fan in the water tray, and I was watching to see whether the roots grew towards the sound of the water, and they did. So my thread work is probably the most important part of my practice. I I've used all sorts of different threads over the years, and I try and look at things within the thread work that are non-conventional. So I tend to use raw material with the thread, and when I'm free machining, I'll machine onto what's known as a soluble base, and then I immerse it in boiling hot water to leave just the sort of vulnerable and tactile surfaces. This piece is actually done with a piece of root residue from the grass pea and just thread. The iterative way of working, where I repeat methods and observe and just stop, reflect, is really important to me as well. I use quite simple and very humble materials. I don't tend to use a lot of costly materials. I try and operate on like a zero budget, and things like string, burlap, hessian, linen, and recycled products as well from the compost heap. The bowl on the right is made from newspaper and discarded waste materials and plant residue, and it's knitted nettle. So this is just a little bite-sized video of me stitching onto moss. I tend to work within the constraints of the hoop, and then if I'm satisfied with the results, then I'll move out of the hoop and I'll try and find a surface where I can actually stitch on a larger piece. And then I tend to stitch to a certain size and then join the pieces together if I want to create a larger hanging or something. This is where I'm starting to look at, recently I've been looking at paper making with the grass pea, and the piece underneath the root residue sample is a paper sort of fibre material. So my paper making experiments, I'll just go back. Yeah, so this is just like a little bite-sized video for my paper making. So as you can see, my methods are really simple. I tend to look at traditional methods as well. The method of paper making hasn't changed for hundreds of years, so I tend to stick that actual video was made during lockdown. So I've had to sort of relocate my practice to the kitchen during lockdown, and I was using just a small A5 mould and decal and creating papers and samples of materials just at my kitchen sink. If I go back, I'm going to, at the moment, I'm also working on a recipe book, and I'm going to call it Paper Soup. The bowl at the bottom is just a sort of liquid paper slurry made from grass pea, and you can see the natural dye that you can extract from the grass pea. So I'm looking at natural dyes, harvesting rainwater, using solar heat as well to dry the papers. I'm always asking myself questions. I created this piece from another controlled root growth study, and I tend to have a sort of conversation in my head as well. It's almost like a constant dialogue where I'm sort of witnessing natural events during my walks or around sort of locations near where I live, and just recreating pieces through that sort of period of quiet observation and reflection. I tend to like unconventional surfaces as well. When I'm stitching, I tend to sort of purposely look for unorthodox materials to see whether I can get the needle through. These are actual harvested pieces of rapeseed stalk. I live in an area on the Norfolk-Suffolk borders where we are surrounded by intensive agriculture. So my work can be quite seasonal. I can look at various sort of parts of the soil, gather, collect pieces of raw material and just work, go back to the studio and work with them in different ways. This is just another little bite-sized video. This grass pea has quite an amazing story. It was airlifted from Syria during the Civil War about 10 years ago, because it was considered a global security crop. And when they airlifted it, they took it to Aleppo, where they set up some labs to regrow it. And then the research that John Innes are doing are in tandem with an organisation known as ICARDA, who are in charge of international research in the dry areas. So they're looking at drought, crop sort of diseases, drought-resistant crops. The grass pea's also is sort of known to have survived the salinity of the rising water levels in East Bengal. So before lockdown, I was going to go to West Bengal and do some papermaking workshops with the farming communities, but obviously that's all stopped now. So my attention for my master's research turned to the papermaking, but actually combining it with localized plant residue. But I'm hoping to actually go out to the Sundarbans in the next couple of years. So this is just a slide of some different types of residue. There's lavender and corn here. I tend to use a food blender and just macerate the residue and sort of different types of surface, sort of ingredients to produce the surfaces. And once they're dry, I can embroider into them or put them together in a piece of artwork. The outcomes are usually really unexpected, so I tend to work intuitively as well, which I enjoy. I don't really work to any particular criteria. I tend to just leave the work and let it flow, and it's very much as it comes. So some of the experiments that I do work and some of them don't. These are some samples here, and these are the seed pods of the grass pea. These are some biopots. I'm actually working with another scientist at the moment where they're thinking of banning single-use plastic in Kenya. So we're developing a range of biocompostable, so compostable pots, miniature plant pots for the tree planting initiative that they've got over there. So place is really important during my walks. This is actually a piece of ancient woodland called fir covert wood. I tend to think of place as a form of memory. This particular piece of woodland I started studying last year during lockdown, and it has an ancient quarry and a chalk pit in it where they extracted the minerals to build the local roads and network of roads and lanes near where I live. So after my master's degree, I'm going to go back to this and start looking at maybe using raw materials from this particular site. So the emotional responses, I suppose, is the best way to describe my pieces. As I said before, I tend to sit just really quietly in the studio and gather my materials and then just sort of place them in various spots within the studio and then just look at them for a while and then choose my threads and maybe do a bit of natural dyeing, a bit of selection and a few little sampling experiments and things. And then just place them all together. So it's also about the relationship that I have with the natural environment. So the cycles of the growth, the patterns, the observation. These pieces are based on an area known as the Ling, which is East Anglia is known for its grassy heathland as well. And there's some parts of heathland that are very wild and very diverse and have a soil structure that you just wouldn't find anywhere else in the UK. So these are pieces are based on people that live at the Ling. And I've been doing some writing about the people that gathered the peat and dried the peat and used the peat as fuel for firewood. Little lichen pot is just constructed from dried lichen and hummus. And the piece on the left with the fern is free machined with lichen and thread. Thank you very much. That's me done. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
for that.
Kirstie. That's all right. I'm not very good at talking to the computer screen.
It's okay. It was really interested in seeing the way that you work and how sustainable your practice is with the choices of what you do.
Thank you.
And with the idea of the fan in the water and the roots going towards the sound of the fan, does that mean that the plants can hear?
Yeah, well, there was a sensory experiment done in Italy a couple of years ago. I can't remember the names of the scientists, but I read an article and it really interested me about the way the roots move. I know we did an experiment at John Innes last year with some tomatoes, and we put the tomatoes in a tub and they purposely put one of the tomatoes that had blight next to the healthy tomatoes. And they noticed that the roots moved away from the tomato that had blight. So yeah, I think they can hear and they do move towards the sound of water.
That's really interesting that plants are able to do that instinctually.
Yeah, amazing.
And when you operate on a zero budget with what you find around you, how do you find that? Is that just something that is really easy to you, or do you ever find yourself yearning for like an acrylic paint or something?
I mean, I have got a stash. I'm not going to lie, over the years I have actually built up quite a stash of acrylics and paints and crayons and drawing. I mean, I've probably got some of my art materials I've probably had for over 40 years. But I just, I mean, operating on a zero budget isn't that difficult really when you live in the countryside. If you're just using the raw materials, and I tend to use quite a lot of stuff. I sort of invented this new thing a couple of years ago that I call my culinary methodology, which is where I use food starch and things for glue. So I use a Japanese paste, and I tend to use bioresins as well. I've learnt how to just dry the petals of the azalea and any sticky plants and use those as glues. And you can actually press, flowers quite simply in a flower press and use those under the needle. So yeah, it's not difficult. It's just a case of being able to just try it out, really. Just try and see whether it works.
Wow, it's amazing how you've managed to build up all of this knowledge with even just down to the base of glue, how they would have used it before we had the processed glue.
Yeah. Well, the natural world I've been working with for a long time. And yes, I do grow plants and use them as for my natural dyes. I've got several plants in my garden that I use as dyes, but even just mowing the lawn and gathering up the grass residue that can produce a really beautiful green, for instance, and food colorings. If you mix food colorings with residue from plants, that can produce a really lovely sort of painterly paste. So yeah, that's why I'm writing a book.
It'd be great. Keep us updated on the book. It sounds really good.
Yeah.
And when you're stitching into things like your moss and that, although you have your soluble thing, what is it that's keeping it all together? Is it the moss supporting the string, or is it
the thread? Really, I see the threads as almost like a connective tissue. So I sort of see the thread as part of the whole piece, and I use the threads. So when I'm stitching, I stitch quite fast on the sewing machine, and the threads tend to just sort of hold the pieces of moss or lichen or hummus together. And then with a soluble base fabric, it's actually man-made fabric base, and you immerse it in boiling hot water. I think many years ago they used to. It's known that when it was first introduced on the market for crafts and for sewing, it was used in hospitals for stitching internally. So it's basically a very thin, flimsy material. So yeah, it's just the thread. Sometimes they all fall apart, but I've learned over the years that if you just layer up your fabrics, layer up the lace and the sheer fabrics, I tend to use very lightweight fabrics, so that the natural material kind of takes center stage.
And which bit of the pea is toxic, and do you incorporate that into your work?
I don't tend to use peat. I tend to use hummus, which is gathered from woodland. So I tend to use hummus that I go out and forage for. We've got several areas of woodland. I have to wait, and it's been a dreadful year for gathering hummus because of the rain. So I get a bit cross when we get lots of rain. So it interrupts my foraging. So, but yeah, I make bowls and all sorts of pieces from just dried, gathered and dried hummus from the forest or woodland floor. Under the trees is the best place to go and forage for. Just under a big oak tree, and you'll get masses and masses of wonderful bits and pieces.
I was going to say, by working seasonally, that's got to be frustrating, especially if it's been a bad year.
Yeah, it can be, actually. I can get quite grumpy if we've had too much rain and I can't get out.
And your traditional paper making that you've been making, how strong is that? Is it like being able to use?
Yeah, you could use it to print on. Again, it depends on the consistency of the slurry. I tend to, if I'm sort of, the charity shops have just reopened, haven't they? So I've been able to get in and get some of my old cotton sheets. I tend to use the traditional method of just cutting up an old cotton sheet, and then I cut tiny pieces, put it into the food blender, and then use that with the raw plant material, and it tends to bind the surface and the slurry together. But my house looks pretty this is just an illusion, this neat bit behind me. I've got paper drying everywhere. It's been tricky during lockdown.
I mean, your practice is really interesting. It's so, I'd call it unconventional, but it's how we would have used to work, like when we didn't have all of this man-made stuff thrown at us.
It's a very simple. I like the simple, no frills, just use what I've got, use things around me, and I've done that for a long time because I am not in the position to be able to sort of go out and spend, £9-10 on a reel of thread, or I wouldn't be any good at the knitting and stitch shows in London or anywhere like that, because I just I use very simple old either reclaimed threads or simple materials.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And in a sense, it's, well, everyone should be doing this for not being able to pollute with empty paint packets and stuff like that. But then it comes to that cross section of this, if everyone's doing it, there's suddenly no more plants and there's no more of this ecosystem. It's interesting to find that balance.
And I think seasonally we are offered lots and lots of different types of materials. So it's like eating seasonally as well. So in the wintertime, people say, although wintertime I tend to work primarily with stalks, so wintered stalks, and alongside the verges of where I live, the hedgerows, I'll go, my colours change, so I tend to sort of just work in browns and neutral greys and earthy sort of colours, whereas in the summertime my work changes because I've got access to more flowers. I think some textile artists, they tend to freeze their material as well, so they'll freeze their leaves for their dyeing or their printing, but I don't tend to do that. I tend to just go out and gather when it's fresh. So I think everybody has their own different sort of ways of working, don't they? It's just personal preference, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting the way that you work, and thank you so much for being able to share it with us today.
It's a pleasure.
And I'm going to open up a panel now. So really, the first question is really, how are you keeping your art practice sustainable? I'm going to throw this over to Tessa first.
My art practice sustainable. I can't really claim that it is, to be honest. I use very high quality golden acrylics, which are so full of pigment that you really don't need to use an awful lot of them. That's about my only real, way of saving the planet here. I don't use oil because I work in layers. So I'm very, very, I work in layers, and I need to be able to do that in order to express myself. In oil, to do that, you would need to be breathing in enormous amounts of, solvents and so on. And I'm not really very good at that. I gave up oils years and years ago because I couldn't breathe with them. So I use my acrylics for that reason, really.
Mm. It's interesting as well, the idea of sustainability in yours, that you repaint over your canvases as well. So there's no waste there, like where people might throw away old artwork. You just reuse it.
Not everybody likes that, I have to say. So one gallery owner said, "You reuse your canvases."
And I'll pass it over to Diane about I mean, there is the beach collecting and that sort of thing. Yeah,
so I guess all my materials just come from things that I've found. It's not like I go out and buy anything, but when I print those sort of images on the wallpaper, I am creating another thing, and I'm very aware that I don't really want to create other things, although I have used the wallpaper for wallpaper in my bedroom, so I guess I have also recycled that. But yes, I'm kind of like, everything that I use is just things that on the whole, that I've found, so I guess that's about as sustainable as you can get.
Definitely. And Louise?
I guess, well, with traveling, I wondered if anybody had wondered about creating the sound piece in New Zealand, talking about eco-anxiety. So it's a good opportunity to talk about that. I was actually obviously I'm from New Zealand and I have family there, and I was there for family health reasons. So for that residency, I tried to sort of take a part of my experience of the environment and bring it back to create a piece of work. So I would say I don't usually travel anywhere with a specific reason of creating work. If I have to go somewhere, I always try and create work on the back of that. Otherwise, I don't really create big installations that I used to do a lot of. I'm using much more sort of sound-based practice, which obviously the technology has an impact on the environment as well. But I guess shipping and exhibiting around the world has a really low carbon cost because you just send it electronically, which again has a cost, but it's perhaps less than shipping in artwork, traditional artwork across. But I'm always trying to look at reducing the impact that I make with my practice. It's interesting sort of debate to have though, about if you get to the point where you're trying to reduce the impact to zero, but you still want to have an impact and a reach with the artwork. So,
yeah, I completely agree with that, and it's hard to find that middle ground of sustainable and doing what you want to do, if that makes sense. A lot of people go onto computers saying it's more sustainable, but then forgetting about the whole impact that the electricity and the running have. It's an interesting tussle really to have as yourself. And Caroline, especially with your sustainability with plants.
Yeah, I mean, my plants are grown in my garden, and the sort of gathering and foraging that I do locally is always sort of residue that's fallen naturally. So I don't see that that's non-sustainable. I think my main concern is probably the electricity that I use with my sewing machine. There's no way I could do it by hand. Although I do hand embroidery more in the winter than that's because my studio is freezing cold in the winter. I just can't sit in it, just get too cold. So Yeah, but I think during my research over the last couple of years has definitely had an impact, and COVID has had an impact on the way I view my resources locally. Because, you know, my whole kind of environment has changed, and I've moved my practice indoors for homeschooling and things like that. So I think my practice has actually become even more sustainable. I've definitely slowed down as well, because my life, my daily life, my routine, my daily routine has changed. So my practice has become slower, which is not very good when you're studying for a degree. Yes, I don't know whether my university is too happy about that, but yeah, so I think as a practice, I think embroidery is extremely sustainable. So I don't know, it is a good debate to have. And I sometimes sort of say to myself, getting out of bed is non-sustainable. Really. As soon as I get out of bed, I have to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. So that's the kettle. But I think if everybody does their bit, like Tessa said, and Diane, I think it's just the awareness, isn't it? If everybody can be aware and come together in spaces like this, for instance, and have a conversation about sustainability, I think that's great. So I hope that answers your question.
It definitely does. I think that opens it up quite well to the next one, with the whole COVID thing. How is it really affecting you? So I know that you've had to move. Homeschooling is pretty difficult. Yeah.
Is that for me, Kirstie?
Yeah, I'll go to you first.
I mean, it's had a major impact, I'm not gonna lie. Some good, you know, has come out of it. I wouldn't like to say that it's been all doom and gloom for me, because I think as humans we're highly adaptable. I think the media plays a big part in the sort of the gloomy, I don't know, it's been dreadful, but it's also been, it has had its positive moments for me, and the positive moments have come from sharing time with my daughter, and the sort of the non-school routine was pretty good, really. And the freedom, I think, in being able to sort of spend time with family, even if it is just indoors. But yeah, it's been different.
Definitely. I think as artists we do have this high resilience to things and very adaptable.
Definitely.
And Diane, how has COVID affected you and your practice?
Well, obviously, you know, it's not stopped me going to the beach. I literally live 2 minutes away from the beach, so I'm still out there walking the dog, collecting stuff on a daily basis. But work-wise, obviously, I used to go in and do workshops in schools and sort of festivals and things like that. So financially, you know, there's been a hit. I was lucky enough in March, just about a week before lockdown took hold, to have got some funding from the Arts Council to do a project called Garden of the Deep, where I was using all the plastic bottles that I found to create flowers out of the plastic bottles. It was going to be an installation, a thing called Festival of Thrift that we have up here. So that didn't happen. I was meant to go out to schools to create, I think I was going to do 3,500 of these flowers, because we use 35 million plastic bottles a day. So there was some sort of reason for it being that number. So yeah, I ended up making most of them by myself in the room. So I didn't make as many as I should have done, and then I took them just out into the environment and photographed them in places where you might find plastic bottles. So the nature of the project changed. You know, the Arts Council were happy with what I did some viral things instead. But yeah, I knew that money was not going to last. So like at the end of my PowerPoint, I said that I've got a job now working teaching pottery at this Ruskin Mill Academy, which is an amazing place. So it's only 3 days a week, but it means if I've got time to do freelance work, but I'm also not panicking that I can't pay the bills.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's changed, but like you said, we're adaptable. We have to be. But the same as Caroline said, I've been locked up with my 2 daughters. There's not been a murder, so that's. As you can imagine, one's 23 and one's 12, so it's been interesting. Like my eldest daughter had to finish a degree in her bedroom, which wasn't ideal, and had to move back from London. But I've just gone, we've had this time that we wouldn't have had. She's like bonded with her little sister in a way that she wouldn't have done, and she's sat in her brother's bedroom, which is now her studio. My son lives away. Having time to do her own practice that she wouldn't have done if the world had carried on as it was. So we just, I think we've made the most of what we can, and have kept each other pretty cheerful.
Yeah.
And entertained in the weirdest sort. So it's changed my financial situation. It's not particularly changed the way I work, other than now I get to kind of back to digging and playing with clay, which is again gets you back to thinking about everything we've dug out the ground. Doesn't matter whether it's clothes on your back, plates you eat off, the house that you sat in, every single thing we can't just keep doing it. I just think we can't keep taking and taking and taking and expect for there not to be a pandemic or there not to be some other kind of catastrophe. It's just we live in a completely unsustainable way.
I completely agree with that. And yeah, I mean, that idea of taking, like we need to start giving.
Oh yeah, my back garden's doing a bit of giving. I'm growing stuff, and you're doing what you can, like we've all said. You can do what you can. If you've got to use paint, you've got to use paint. But don't go and buy your your gin and tonic out of a glass bottle or something. You've got to kind of weigh things up, haven't you? You can't stop like doing everything, but I think you can certainly consider consider your choices.
Yeah, exactly. Like a little bit more thought into what you're doing, definitely. And Louise, how is it affecting you?
Well, I was lucky enough to go to work from home, so I didn't have to commute into London, which meant I had more time. And during this period, I got a grant from Southeast Creators to help to contribute to the building costs of a studio. So now with my collaborator and another artist, we have myself and my collaborator have an 86 square meter studio in a barn on a farm that grows crops for biofuel, which is really, really amazing. So I've sort of gained more space than I could ever imagine. And I've had a grant from the Arts Council to develop my creative practice, and participated in a couple of online residencies, which has been really amazing, with people from all over the world in some instances. So all of these things wouldn't have happened without the pandemic, I guess. So, swings and roundabouts, I guess. Good things have come out of it. Other things haven't been great, but yeah, I'm glad that life has paused a little bit and allowed for a time for reflection as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think everyone has actually sat down and reflected and thought about their lives, even down to the point where certain industries, people are realizing, no, I know what's important to me, and this is not important. It's everything else that's important, and it has really been needed, just to slow down and catch a breath and figure out your quality of life, as well as having more time to practice, more time to do the things that you want to do. And Tessa, how has COVID affected you, really?
Well, I was shielding. I had to shield, which means I haven't been anywhere very much. But now I'm double vaxxed. I'm Supergirl. okay to go out and do stuff. It's quite daunting, actually, if you've not gone anywhere for a long time, to suddenly think you could go somewhere. But I've appreciated having a garden. I really, really have. I've always loved my garden, but it has been an absolute lifesaver. So that's a great goodness. And, you know, we have walked more than we normally would with masks and what have you. And I think that's been great goodness too. And yeah, it's been a really strange time, but like, there are positives. I mean, you know, I'm part of a group of abstract artists, and almost all of us were, you know, sort of getting on a bit in years. And we managed to get ourselves together, get all on Zoom, have meetings, invite speakers. Actually, we've found that artists are quite happy if, you know, to come and talk to us. As lovely, because, you know, gave them something to do, and it gave us a bit of inspiration, because when you're locked in, pretty much, it's so hard, isn't it, to get on and do stuff. It's quite difficult. And I played around with video, which I've never done before, so that was, you know. So yeah, it has been the most weird time, but I think you're right. I think having had time to just say, well, you know, the world's on hold. Let's just all sit back and think what really matters here. And so that has been a good thing.
It's really interesting how people are finding majoritively positive things out of this situation, where there is always that, yes, there is the doom and gloom and the deaths and the bad parts of it, but we've been resilient and we've found ways around it, and we found ways to keep our qualities of life, to keep our practice going, to just find a way around the finances and be able to continue what we want to do and how we want to do it. And I mean, when better than World Environment Day to discuss that? Is the thing that's living and breathing and keeping us going. I think the main question is, how do you think we're going to go forward in the future? While using our art as the conversation, what would we want it to use to change the world and change one aspect? That's a pretty loaded question. I'll just give you a second to think, and then I'll throw it over. I think I'll throw this one over to Louise first.
Okay. If I could get people to change their thinking with my practice, it would be to embrace a cosmic perspective of our natural environment. So thinking about the value of Earth's ecosystems as the only planet that we understand that has a sort of ecosystem like this on it, and thinking about how valuable that is, and how we have to protect it with everything that we have.
That's a fantastic sentiment. And I'll pass over to Caroline now.
I think my main objective would be, apart from obviously the agricultural message that I'm trying to portray with my current research and my current work, is that just how working very simply with nature, with your own natural resources, and with the seasons, how sustainability can sort of be portrayed, and that message of using just local materials simply, that's probably my main aim, is just to promote that and provoke conversation about that. I mean, the agricultural industry actually produces more emissions than the aviation industry, which I don't think many people know. So that's obviously the message that I'm trying to get out through my pieces at the moment. But yeah, just to work with nature rather than against it.
I mean, that's a fantastic thing to say, because we do need to look after it completely.
Yeah.
And Tessa?
I think I'm just wanting to keep going, really. What I've been doing, and this has actually made me write down a lot of things, or just order my, doing this piece today, made me write down and order things a bit better for myself, so that I've got loads more paintings that I could have talked about, but it was a useful exercise to do that, and I would like to show my work and talk about it again more. I'm still not feeling, I don't know how you all feel, but I'm still not feeling like I'm going to rush around hugging everybody. I'm still waiting, for things to become slightly less uncertain, really. So I want to exhibit work, and I should really be doing exactly that, and writing off and doing all of that. So I will get around to doing that soon, I think, because that's my way of operating. I produce work and then I try to talk to people about it. I think to achieve anything with climate change, we have to work at all levels. So literally from your garden, and your practice, up to trying to, endlessly writing to your MP, being an absolute pain in the neck, just trying to persuade people to do the right thing, at sort of all levels. So, wherever we are, we just need to go with what we've got.
Yeah, it's so true that yes, I think everyone should write to their MPs, because how are we going to make a change if they're blatantly ignoring us? If you have enough voices, shout as loud as you can, and they will eventually hear. Whether they do anything is another matter. But if they hear, then they have to do something. They have to at least try and do something. And finally, Diane.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think through my own practice, I will just continue to, hopefully raise awareness of what we're doing to the planet. And just to sort of reiterate what Tessa was saying, we can do that. I'm growing things in my garden. I'm trying to buy things more locally, and be as sustainable in my own life as possible. You can't do everything. I still have to drive to work. I still have other things I have to do. I have, children to feed, etc. And they're not going to all survive off the bit of rocket and a couple of potatoes I've grown in the garden. With the best will in the world. But I think the message is about consumption as well. We don't need to keep buying stuff, like go to charity shops. You can go to charity shops for your clothes if you need new clothes. You don't need to buy 20 bottles of Coke or whatever. And if, and to keep putting pressure on companies. But I think to put pressure on individuals, because although we can I could write to Coca-Cola or whoever, makes plastic bottles every day of the week. But if we put pressure on people to stop drinking it so much, or stop buying those things so much, that's where the real pressure is going to come from. Because I don't think, having written to these companies, that they're really willing to make change unless there's something in it for them. Whereas, it's like the people have the power to not buy that stuff. And that's like, if everybody went out tomorrow and didn't buy that stuff, then they would do something about it. And I don't think they'll realistically do anything massively constructive. Same with governments, until the pressure's on them for us to do something about that. So I'm just campaigning at local level and going into schools and talking about why it's not important. And now things have opened up a bit. I was in a college last week, the week before, and I said, there's going to, by 2050, there's going to be as much plastic in the sea as fish. I'll be 80. I'll almost be not giving a monkeys anymore, but you lot be my age. And they all went, oh yes, it's like, it's quite hard to get that message over to people to change the ways that, and that is the hardest part of all of this. I enjoy making the work, but to get people to kind of change their attitude is the most difficult thing.
I completely agree. It takes 6 weeks to build a habit, but one day to destroy it.
It's hard, but you've got to keep, I can't not do anything. So I'll keep pestering people. Going.
Pester enough, they'll finally listen. Yeah. Well, I have to say a massive thank you to all four of you for being here today, sharing your practice and sharing your views, and a massive thank you to all the attendees who come today to listen. It's been brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Brilliant.
you. Thanks.
Yeah, keep me up to date with what all of you are doing, and with the cookbook. Send me a message when it's out. I'll spread it far and wide, and if anyone wants to share anything, just let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'll say goodbye now. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.